Diva Tonight. Glamour for your ears. This is 40, a female perspective, with Carlene Humphrey. Our guest is Ashley Newport, the editor for INSAUGA.
Hi, I'm Carlene, and this is Diva Tonight. On this episode, we are actually doing a focus on a milestone birthday, turning 40. I turned 40 in April. My colleague turned 40 not too long ago. We are talking about what it means to turn 40. And without further ado, Ashley Newport, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm not too bad, actually. Thanks for asking. I appreciate you taking the time to be on the podcast and share with us on Zoom your experience with the milestone, or just even your thoughts. What are your thoughts on 40, like turning 40?
It's been hard. I did not want to turn 40. I didn't want to, die, which is the alternative either. But it's shocking to me. Sometimes I walk around, or I'm just like working, or I'm just, I'm going to bed at night and I'm like, I'm 40. Like I'm 40. Because 40 is kind of that age that when you're younger, as you might recall, when you're in your 20s, 40 is old. Like you're like, oh, you're 40. 40 is like, your mom. Mind you, your parents might have been older than that when you were in your 20s. I know mine were. But it's quite something. And it's weird now because I'm 40, turned 40 in October, and I have a 3-year-old. Like so many people, I had, a child late in life. He was born 3 days before my 37th birthday. So I often think about how, it's crazy. But when he's like starting high school, I'm going to be 50. Whereas like when I was starting high school, my mom was like I think my mom was just turning 40.
Wow.
And I was going into high school. So that's like, crazy to me. Another thing, I was talking to another friend of mine recently, she's turning 40 in January. And I was saying, like, I think there's a lot of talk about how, it's never too late. And that's true. It's never too late. If people haven't, settled down yet, whatever that means for them, and they still want, marriage, or they still want kids, or they still want to do, whatever. People say, it's never too late. Like that's true. But one thing that's kind of interesting about starting a family, at least closer to 40, is it's a weird time in your life because you're approaching, or you're in middle age, you're going into like, perimenopause. Like, you're kind of looking your like change of life in the face, and you're also dealing with other things like aging or sick parents. Like, I lost like my dad a few years ago. My mom's alone now. So you have like, different responsibilities. Whereas, it kind of used to be, you'd be in your 20s, you'd have a kid. Your parents might have been, like young and in good shape and healthy. So they would be able to, come over and help you. But now you kind of have like multiple different caretaking roles, be those like physical or emotional.
Yeah, that's so true, though. I think a lot, like some people, like when they have their kids young, they get to grow with their kids and experience life in a different way. Whereas when you have your kids later on in life, it's like the path to get there, right? And then you have me, where I'm 40 and I don't have a child, and you get reminded that you're not getting any younger. And, I even had the conversation about kids with my dad. And I'm like, when were you thinking about all this? Like, I'm surprised because my dad never pressured me or anything or said anything, right? And so 40 is that time. You're right, though, because it makes you think about all these things. And if you weren't thinking about it, your doctor's going to remind you, because I've had so many appointments, right? And so for you, it's kind of like, I guess it's a reminder of where you are in your life too, right?
Yeah. And the medical thing is really interesting too, because like not interesting, it's scary, right? Because not that people who are young can't get sick, they can, but once you hit 40, and it's really been something I've thought a lot about, is your risk of all the illnesses goes up, right? Like it's like, oh, you're 40, you're more likely to get these cancers. You're more likely to have, you have to be more careful about your heart and your blood pressure and your this and your that. So being middle-aged comes with like an increase in like health issues, which I haven't really addressed yet or really like dug into but it's always in the back of my mind. I've always had like major health anxiety, like always. So that's one thing too, is like, when you're 26 and worried about your health, like, that the odds are in your favor, that it's not anything serious. Whereas, when you're 46, which we're not there yet, but, the odds of there being, that lump being dangerous or, those heart palpitations being more serious is much higher than it was.
Do you think that maybe because you had your son later in life, you were focused on I need to have a family at 30, you know what I mean? Like, I remember when we had our conversation about school and like how you got to your position at INSAUGA right now. You know what I mean? It's one of those things where I feel like what was important to you at at certain stages in your life, you know?
It wasn't really about making this versus that, actually. It wasn't like, oh, I'm going to prioritize like this over that. It just kind of happened.
Right,
just
right.
Kind of how things worked out for me. After I finished school, as you know, we went to school together. I met someone and we dated for almost 6 years. But then when I was 29, we broke up. So I had expected that relationship to last forever and get married. And it's good that it didn't. But I found myself at 29 having to kind of start over. And so it wasn't like, oh, I'm 30. Do I have a child or do I pursue a career? It was just like, I'm 29 and this is where I'm at, like currently single. And the career thing also just kind of happened naturally at the time. I was like, 20, that's kind of a good, benchmark. It was 2014, or we broke up at the end of 2013. So beginning of 2014, I was working at my dad's office. I was freelancing on the side. I finally moved out of my parents' house. I lived at home till I was 29. So 2014 was like a big year in that sense. I got a condo because you could actually get one then. It wasn't outrageous. Like it was like a challenge, but it was like a doable thing. And around that time, I think it might have been a bit later, 2015, where I had been freelancing for INSAUGA. And then the publisher said, I think I can bring you on full time. So I accepted. So, that just kind of happened. And then it was just like, it was crazy. It was a whirlwind. It was really demanding, but I pushed through and we have like a bigger team now. So it's a whole different experience. But that just kind of is how it happened. So I started kind of growing with in that role. And then right before that happened in 2015, I met my current husband. We met online, but it was easy to hit it off because we'd had mutual friends. Funny story is that he went to high school with a good friend of mine. So, 2013, I'm single. 2014, I finally get my own place. 2015, I meet my now husband. 2016, I start, the job that I'm at right now. And then, my husband and I, we got engaged, after dating for 2 years, which I think is a kind of standard normal time for people in their 30s. Because we started dating when we were both 30, got engaged when we were 32, got married a year later, 33. And then we didn't want to have kids right away. We just kind of wanted to, enjoy. We bought a condo downtown. So we were living in a building at right up front in Jarvis. And we were just, enjoying our lives downtown. We were going to lots of, we've talked about this. We were going to lots of TIFF movies when TIFF was in town. We would go to JFL when it was in town. We weren't big partiers. We weren't going to clubs and stuff like that unless it was a special occasion. But we were just enjoying life, the festivals and the events and the freedom. And then, once we were both 35, we thought, okay, now is probably a good time to start, thinking about kids. And COVID hit.
Right.
Yeah.
COVID,
COVID hit. It was just a crazy time. Everyone was just at home doing nothing, not knowing what was going to happen, when this was going to end. My dad got sick. That was a big, huge, massive, monumental, horrible change in my life. And that, so that was a really just tough and terrible, terrible time. And then, happenstance, shortly after he passed away, he died in January of 2021. I found out I was pregnant. There was some planning involved, of course, right? Okay, we're 35. Maybe we should start trying for a baby, see what happens. But a lot of the stuff, it wasn't really, oh, I'm going to not date because I'm going to do this instead. Or, oh, I'm going to put off this so I can do this instead. This is just honestly how it kind of happened. And I feel like I'm not alone in how this is just kind of where life takes people.
I think it's one of those things where timing happens or life happens or circumstance or a bit of both. And I feel like having that family dynamic is important to who you are as a person. You know what I mean? But listening to you talk about your timeline and listening back to you, I can think about myself, every stage of your life, what was happening to, at 29, I think I just finished school and I was in
Hamburg.
Yeah, I just finished in Hamburg. And then I was in my first apartment on my own. I mean, I had roommates and then I moved on my own and then I tried to find work in radio, but didn't. So I got a job working reception and then I was at IKEA. And so stuff happened then. But yeah, it's kind of one of those things where listening back to you, I feel like the hallmark to the stepping stones to your life and maybe even your decisions is maybe the people in your life, like your parents and like how they brought you up and what your role models are, or just who you are as a person. You know what I mean? Like we both grew up in different household dynamics, and even listening to you talk about it, like we've talked about other things and the fact that we both know each other from York University. And even at York, you know, your experience at York was different than my experience at York. You know what I mean? I got into York, took out a student loan, had some drama happen along the way where at one point for me, it was like, ooh, I don't even know if I'm going to finish. Like I had a moment like that. So it's like listening back to your experience is so amazing at the timeline. And, you know, things always happen in life that we're not prepared for. And I think I have to go back to you and what you said, like dad passed away. I'm sure that was hard, right? To be like, I'm pregnant and I'm going to have a baby and my dad's not.
Yeah, it was obviously just like a terrible time because obviously like, you know, the death of anyone, you know, close to you and your family who you love is obviously a horrible thing, but it was just an especially weird time because it was COVID. There was like, you know, huge restrictions in place. You know, people were told like, you know, not to leave their houses, not to do anything. So, you know, the whole time he was sick, it was like, you know, you're not supposed to come here. And then of course, like his last like 10 days where he was in the hospital before he passed away, like no one was allowed to go there except for my mother.
Wow.
It just felt awful.
Yeah.
Like it's just, you know, a terrible memory and a terrible time. But, you know, there was a lot of distraction at that time too, because, you know, he died and then it was kind of like, okay, like the worst scenario has like occurred, like it's happened, like he's gone. But then I was pregnant. So I have to, you know, look forward. So we moved that year, not far, but, you know, we were in a condo at the time. And I was like, I don't, you know, think I want to have a baby in a condo. Like, I mean, people do that. That sounds terrible. People do that. It's totally fine. So we moved to a house. Our house is not large. It's a little bit of a fixer upper, but at least gave us like a little bit more space. But moving was also a big distraction. And then, of course, my mother had to move because she was in our like childhood home. You know,
there's a lot in common. I actually had to move during COVID too.
Oh, where'd you end up moving to? Brampton?
Yeah, I moved from like Scarborough to Brampton after Christmas. Oh my gosh, moving December 27th.
Oh my God.
2020. Brutal.
What made you decide to move to Brampton?
Oh, I was working actually in Mississauga at BMO at the time. And so that was the transition. Don't move close to work, you know? And so I moved there because of that, but I also moved there because of like my friend referred me to the landlords. So it kind of worked out because I got the place way earlier. But like you, it was like COVID happened. Then I got laid off. So 2020 was a roller coaster too. Yeah. Like, oh my goodness. So hearing you say you were moving and then you have to help your mom move and then oh my goodness. I think 2020 is a period in our lives that even though we move forward, is still think about it.
It does. It casts a long shadow. It casts a long shadow. I think we don't like to talk about like the intricacies of it, like the political debates at the time and the, you know, should you wear this mask or should you do this? Like, I don't think anyone wants to talk about or dwell on that anymore. I certainly don't. But just the upheaval it had in people's lives, I think is quite something. And I think we see a lot of trauma from that era still, just in this is kind of a bigger topic than this, but, you know, what we've seen the past few years, like in, you know, society writ large, we've seen, you know, massive increases in homelessness. We've seen huge increases in or appear to be large, you know, significant increases. I think that's been percolating since before, but COVID didn't help, you know, mental health and addiction issues. We still see, you know, a lot of upheaval with the economy, high prices, house and rental prices are, I'm sure, as you absolutely know, just insurmountable, just insane, just.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm paying double what I was paying. It's just like, I totally feel it. And
yeah.
So, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It's hard. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's one of those things, too, where you can say, okay, you know, like speaking, you know, pivoting a little to housing stuff, you know, if somebody lives right downtown, especially if they purchase a home, right? You know, you buy an old Victorian in the annex or, you know, something like that. You can expect the price to be high. You know, it's the biggest city.
A Victorian in the annex now? Like the annex is not like Richmond Hill or Richdale Farm. Like that's a really nice area where downtown Toronto where.
Oh, like near Riverdale Farm, like Cabbagetown?
Oh, yeah. Cabbagetown.
I love that area.
I love them. Yeah, I actually rented I had an apartment. I lived there for a year.
Oh, Oh, cool. Yeah. We
Yeah.
take our son to Riverdale Farm sometimes. It's like we drive to it. It's places you would expect it to be really expensive, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, Barrie and Bowmanville and
Oh my gosh.
London.
Never been to Bowmanville, but I keep hearing about it. Bowmanville. Is it booming?
Like you would, these
Yeah.
are, like these places are, hundreds of kilometers away from Toronto. And it's unbelievable and unfair that people who grew up in these communities or who, are looking for something more affordable, are still seeing, $1 million price tags for townhouses. Maybe not that high, but, even.
Oh, I believe it. It's probably close to. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So it's just, insane. And, this obviously puts a lot of pressure on people. We know this from work. We write about, crime all the time. We have a lot of reporters who, work closely on, not like with police, but, with police materials, I guess you could say, news releases, press releases, interviews, going to, press conferences, reading the reports and stuff like that. I mean, crime is up, like particularly car thefts.
Right.
And like home invasions. Like we're all kind of dealing with post-COVID trauma in a lot of ways, just because it was a crazy time. And we fought a lot during that time because there was, it was it should have been, kind of simple. Like there's this, it's a virus. We're going to work on this. But it was very political. People, you should think of it this way, or you should not do this. You should do this more. People took sides. It was.
Yeah, there was a divide when you said like it should have been simple. SARS was simple. I think like SARS didn't hit as hard because even though SARS was happening and then some people were affected by it, the city was still running. Whereas when COVID happened, the city wasn't running. We went into lockdown and then we thought, oh, yeah. After how long the first lockdown was? Oh, we're going to go into lockdown again?
Yeah,
no, I can't. I can't go into lockdown again. Like
no. And there was a lot of people who were very puritanical about it, who were like, but it's, it's what's right and it's what's noble and it's what's best. And it is your duty and responsibility to not leave your house for however long I say you shouldn't leave your house. And I think what kind of is at the root of the matter is that we don't have as much control over these things as we would like to think we do. Because, and it was, these restrictions were applied really haphazardly, right? Like, oh, you couldn't shop at a small store, but you could shop at Walmart. You couldn't eat in the restaurant, but, kitchen staff could come in and work at the restaurant, right? So a lot of it seemed silly, and it was silly.
I guess we have to make reference to your job description and what you do for a living, because in hindsight,
yeah, you
are a writer, you know what I mean? And Ashley Newport, who I've been speaking to now. We're talking about milestone, but also about, just everything that happened all in one, self-encompassing. So INSAUGA is where you spend most of your day other than your family life, right? And, how long have you been working at INSAUGA?
Yeah, full time since 2016. I want to say, but I've been like freelancing for them. Started off freelancing, and I want to say that started in 2012, 2013, I want to say.
Yeah.
But full time, 8 years. It was 8 years in September, which is crazy to think.
Okay. Well, congrats. You're a veteran now.
Oh, yeah, I've been doing this for a long time. So it's local news. We actually started maybe this is the wrong word for it, but kind of a sister site, if you will, called Your City Within, which is just a lifestyle site dedicated to pretty much all of Southern Ontario, but primarily Toronto, which is weird because INSAUGA doesn't really touch Toronto because it doesn't really need to. It's always meant to kind of be a news resource for the suburbs. We focus on Mississauga, of course, Brampton.
Mayor Hazel McCallion, and now the new mayor of Mississauga. What's her name? I don't know.
So she won a by-election recently. Carolyn Parrish. You're thinking of Bonnie Crombie, who left to become the leader of the Liberal Party.
Right. Let's not go into too much politics, but your role there has obviously advanced. You've been promoted and you've worked your way up. Do you feel like you did certain things to move your way up? They say if you want to move up, you gotta be nice.
I'm very nice. I'm super nice.
Okay. I believe it. It. I mean, I've told you stuff from our York days, together. And before we go further, I got to tell you, Ashley, talking to you now, it's been so long, but even from our last interview, I feel like you are so more outspoken, so more opinionated vocally. Like you've always been very quiet. You still talk, but like when we were at York together, it's like talking to you now is like, oh my gosh, this is the Ashley I knew like our York days. Like it's so like night and day. It's amazing. And it's a good thing, It's awesome.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's just been a long time. It's just been, many, many years, but I'm always like very nice. It's too nice. But honestly, the biggest thing was just the learning that I had to do a lot of it kind of on my own, because when I first started, I had never really written a ton of hard news, to be fair. Like I wasn't I had to learn writing up police press releases and cop stuff, where to find information, where to find out, about where crimes were happening, who to contact, City Hall, covering like, council meetings and, reading agendas and, real estate. That was a big thing. I've learned a lot about writing about real estate just because it's a big issue and has been for many years, actually. Like pre-COVID, even house prices were getting quite high. So this isn't, it has not gotten better. The trend is moving in the wrong direction, if you will, but it's been an issue for quite some time. So just like I've been able to just kind of teach myself stuff naturally, I guess. And then as our team has expanded and grown, we've actually gotten some more reporters, like, people who've been, working at local news organizations over the years that have shut down or moved. A lot of them have, like, there's been a lot of small newspapers that have, closed up shop. I've learned a lot from them because some of them have like a lot more experience than me, actually.
Right. I mean, we're going digital in every aspect. And, the newspaper, you became a writer for INSAUGA, which was just at the prime time to come out with a digital newspaper at that time, especially for Mississauga, which Toronto had various newspapers. But this is obviously really smart, like when it came out, right? But even to touch on what you said, like doing your own research and like getting a lot of information and becoming really good at researching things, right? And when you started off.
Yeah, it's the biggest learning curve. And then you talk to the more you write, the more you make connections and you talk to more experts. So you can like get certain people on the phone and they can tell you about bird flu, or they can tell you about housing, or they can tell you about arts recovery or opera. I did a feature about opera, opera in Mississauga, because every year, no, I don't know if everyone knows this, but about once a year now, and this has been going on for a few years, the break for COVID, of course, at the Living Arts Center in Mississauga, they stage a full opera once a year, usually just a 2-night run. So you don't pay an arm and a leg to like see an opera. So if you want to see an opera just because, it's an opera, because a lot of people, they probably don't listen to opera music in their spare time. That's very niche. But if you're one of those people that's just like, I've never been to an opera and I kind of want to go.
I've never been to one.
Yeah, it's accessible. It's not that expensive. Very nice theater. Obviously incredibly talented cast, but I was kind of curious. I was like, how does this kind of work? Like, how is this sausage made? So I reached out to like the symphony, like the guy who does like comms for like the symphony, and he put me in touch with like the maestro, and we had like, a good phone conversation where he like told me a lot of stuff about how, operas how they're funded and
how are they funded?
Grants for the most part, because they cost a lot of money to put on. Not like millions or anything like that, but like quite a bit of money. And the talent is rare, especially like in Canada, because it's like, big country, but small population. So like how many trained opera singers are there, right? You don't really think about this. Not many. So, you have your talent. They can't perform a ton of shows because it's hard on their voice. So, there has to be like, rest in between. So it's, it's very niche. So funding, you sell tickets, of course. So, you might get like, a full house or an almost full house. But I just like learned a lot from this conversation. And now sometimes I think about it's funny if someone were to say, why is there not more opera? I'd be like, well.
Oh my gosh, you're the kind of person like me, just full of information, because I think we learned this from university. I don't take what people say for value. I will be like, really? Where did you get that? What's your source? And I will still go and research it. That's just the bookworm in me, where you've had the opportunity to interview people based on what you're writing about. So that's so cool. You know what I mean? But
it's been good. It's like you learn a lot. And yeah, some people might tell you things that you have doubts about. Actually, funny story. I won't say who he was because he actually is no longer with us. He died. So,
is this a musical artist?
No, he's not musical. He was, but he was well enough known because he started a fairly successful fast food franchise in the early 2000s. So, anyways, I ended up interning at a media company that ran 2 trade publications called Food Service and Hospitality and Hotelier. And then after I finished that internship, I actually worked with them. I worked there I did a contract. I want to say it was a year and a half, maybe a little bit less than a year and a half. I did like some writing there and learned a lot from them too. And I did a profile on this man that he founded a very successful fast food franchise. I don't know if it is outside of Canada. I don't think it is, but there's multiple locations everywhere. So, but he's not a household name by any stretch. But I was, asking him your usual boilerplate questions, like what inspired this? What was your story? And he told me a very elaborate story about a skydiving incident. And it was a really challenging thing because I did not believe him. Like I thought he was making it up. And I don't have any proof that he did or not, but it was one of those weird moments where I was like, I don't want to include any of this in the story because I think it's a lie and I have no way to corroborate this or prove this didn't happen.
So was it that gut feeling that you felt like he wasn't telling you the truth? Like,
yes, I had a gut feeling. I don't think he was telling me a lie to like be impressive. I think he was like screwing with me. Like, I think he thought it was funny. Like, I think he was like, oh, is this person dumb? Can I make them print something ridiculous? I think that's what he was doing. Like, I felt like
because you were young at the time. I guess you thought maybe naive, right? But.
Yeah, like I am. Like, I mean, I was, but like,
it's always in your gut where you're like, and we always ignore that gut feeling sometimes. So how did you end up writing the story? Did you?
I don't recall. I think did a play. I think I just kind of said something very much kind of, putting the onus on to like him be like, oh, he claims that like an accident led to this. Like I just kind of really glossed over it, very vague, non-specific, because like didn't believe the intricacies of the story. And I think he was telling it to me not, to make himself sound better. Like I said, I think he was messing with me. Like I think he thought it was funny. So that was like a tough one. And then later on, anyways, like I said, he passed away recently, which is unfortunate. He was not very old.
Wow. What did he die of? Do you know?
Sorry. I think it was a health issue.
You don't know.
But he was only, from what I can recall, I think he was only in his 50s, like his early 50s. Not that much older than us.
A lot of people are passing away. Like my coworker just told me today that his dad passed away suddenly. Everything happened so fast. I was like, what? Like, I was talking to, like, life happens at the flip of the switch. Like, you just never know.
Anything can happen. I've always like thought of that too, because I'd heard like of instances over the years of, things happening suddenly, which like scares me a lot as I get older. And like I said, my son's 3. So I think about how, me and his father are like, 40. And I often have like dark moments where I'm like, what if something, of course you worry about your child and what if something happens to them? Like that's a foregone conclusion. You worry about that constantly all the time. But sometimes there's other dark moments where you're like, what if something happens to my husband? Like, what if something happens to me? Like, what if we have a car accident? What if us has a heart attack? Like, what's
what happens though when you're a parent though? Like you think about those things even though you don't want to think about them?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wow. I'm not a mom. And I think a lot of people, the people I know who are parents, like just you are, right? Because it's not just you anymore. You're thinking about someone else. It's very important.
Yes. And like so vulnerable. And, they love you so much. Like their pains, like they want to be independent.
They're so free though, right? Isn't he just so free? Like it's like that burst of energy, right? Like you're so free to do whatever, like, and say things and not really think about it. And it's that part of like discovering life, right?
Oh yeah. They're so funny at this age. It's like they say whatever, they repeat a lot, but it's really funny how they like apply their knowledge.
Is it annoying that he asks you a lot of questions? I find like when my siblings were younger, it's always like, I'm like, I just answered that question. And another question, like what, But I think like you, as a mom, you have to be so patient too. But sometimes, you have to be like strict a little bit. So out of the two of you and your husband, who's the strict parent and who's the more, okay, Archer? Yeah.
It depends. That's a good question. I would say there's times where I'm more permissive about certain things. Like I'm not as married to routines, whereas my husband's very much like routines, like this is bedtime and, this is like you turn off the TV and like this is that. I'm not as a stickler. I'm not a big stickler about that, but I would have to say my husband has immensely more patience than I do. Like I'm more likely to get like frustrated and yell than he is. So even though there's certain things like I don't care as much about, like I'm like, okay, if we end up going to bed a little bit later tonight, like no worries, I'm not concerned. Or being like, okay, if you want to watch an extra song, like I don't care, it's fine. Whereas he'll be like, no, we have to stick to our routine. Same with, when he's like playing with his like friends at the park and stuff like that, like I won't necessarily like hover. Like I'll, kind of stand back a bit, try to give him like some space. That kind of thing would make my husband more nervous. Like he kind of likes to be around him, watching him, worried about him. But, if he's like, not listening or having tantrums or being crazy, like I'm the one who's definitely more likely to be like, I can't do this anymore. Like,
no,
I'm done. Whereas like he has a lot more patience for that. So it's kind of an interesting like mix. Like he's definitely more, patient with him and like, able to kind of like, sit through more, but he's more of a stickler about the routines. Like this is bedtime, this is when the TV goes off.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Oh my gosh. There's so much to talk about. But I think what I want to ask you is this. When you had your birthday, how did you feel?
Oh, scared. Like being 40 is scary, I think, because I could be wrong. And I think we'd have to talk to more people who are a lot older than us about how they felt about different birthdays. And I think, their perspective would be very different because they've just lived more life.
So you think I should talk to other people who turned 40, but also people who are reflecting back too?
Yeah, I mean, maybe like if you wanted to, like, maybe people in their 60s or something, right, would have, would be like kind of like different. But, culturally, we've always been obsessed with youth, like always. I think that's historic. I don't think that's new. We've always tried forever to find ways to look younger. But I feel like, and I could be misremembering, but I remember being in elementary school. And I think this is just by virtue of being a child, and maybe you felt the same way, but like your parents and your friends' parents, when you were a little kid, they looked and felt old to you, right? Like, they had this kind of like matronly or, older gentlemanly quality to them. Like maybe the moms had like, that kind of like uniformly short haircut that, was very utilitarian, very easy to maintain. Maybe everyone's like dad had like a mustache. They wore, big blazers and, they felt they felt like, old, right? Not like not like that old kind of stereotypical like grandma, but they felt, like old. And then I think that something has changed. And I think it's a good thing because I think even now you see people who are, older than that, people in their 60s and 70s who still look really youthful, really put together, and I see a lot of people, our age that I, grew up with, went to school with, and I might not see them like in person so much anymore just because, the way life goes. But you can you'll see their pictures on like Facebook or Instagram or whatever. And I feel like people look young and we feel young. Like, even though we're 40, like I don't feel 40. Like I know I'm 40, but I still feel the same as I did 10, 12 years ago. I wish I looked exactly the same as I did 10, 12 years ago. Like I look back at those pictures and I'm like, oh my God, it was so beautiful. Like, why am I complaining?
Right? Oh my gosh, so true.
Yeah.
I can relate to that. And I've had people be like, I thought you were in your 20s. I'm like, you're so good for my ego. My body doesn't feel like early, like mid 20s, but it's true. The backache pains and not being so agile, but like,
me too. Oh God.
But you're right. But when I heard you talk about, that generation, like when we were growing up and then now, our generation is looking younger. I think we are doing things a little bit different. And we were that generation that played in the schoolyard and got in trouble for staying past my time to come back home, playing basketball with the boys at the community center, Wallace Emerson Community Center at Galleria Mall. Like I lived in Toronto, and my mom coming to get me and fully embarrassing me in front of my friends because I had to come home. And I'm just like, why are you basketball? But it was just,
memories. But she was like, right? You're coming home. Like,
Carlene, what are you doing? Because I think I was with my sister Lena. I took my siblings with me everywhere. Like, you know what I mean? If like obviously I took care of my siblings a lot. Like I had to figure out creative ways to find activities for us, right? And so listening back to you to our time when we were 9, 10, 11, 12 and parents at that time, it's like flashback and I have a memory. Like a random memory of like this one girl in my class and her parents were a lot older. And you just ignited that memory. I don't even know where that came from. It was so random, but yeah.
It was rarer then, like to have like older parents. Like my dad was older, actually. My dad was older because my dad was previously married. Like before he met my mother, he was married, had 2 boys. My 2 older brothers, they divorced and then he like remarried my mom and me and my younger brother. So me and my older brothers have a pretty big age difference. My oldest one is 12 years older than me. The other one is 10 years older than me. And they lived with their mom. They would come over on weekends and stuff like that. But they lived with their mom in Toronto. Whereas like my family lived in like Mississauga, and their upbringing was like so different from mine. Like just the shift in like just that one generation was massive because they were latchkey kids. Very independent, going everywhere on their own. Whereas like me and my brother, like, born just, a few years later in the 80s, were very much kind of like the first like helicopter parent generation of kids. like with parents who kind of hovered, who like, drove us to and from school for a really long time. I know every like neighborhood and like, dynamic is like different.
Gosh. Yeah.
But, like,
Hearing you say that, oh my God, your parents were helicopter parents, whereas I'm the kid that was like walking to and from school. And that's the time where I think your parents were being helicopter, because I think eventually there was that time where, oh, now we can't walk the kids to school because I think it happened when we were that age, like we were 12, where the first kidnapping happened or something happened to change that scared everyone, because
it was a 24-hour news cycle that really made people afraid of kidnappings, because there actually hasn't, and there's a lot of like, I can't give you like the stats off the top of my head, but there's actually quite a bit of data on this, and there has not been an increase in kidnappings in recent years. In fact, they've gone down. I think they peaked and were at their height in the 70s. And since then, they've gone down or stayed low. But there's been more high profile cases. Paul Bernardo's probably the one you're thinking of. That was a big one in the 90s, 1994, I believe.
Yeah. Holy.
And then,
it just came up in the news again, but there was another girl I remember, because I live close to it. And I think they put a picture of her because she was missing for a while. But because I grew up at Dundas and Bloor area. And I think it was just one of those things where you can't forget when someone got kidnapped so young and you
can't forget. It really sticks in your mind because even though something is like statistically unlikely to happen to you, knowing that it happened to someone else will always strike fear into your heart, right? Like knowing that someone's in a fire, knowing that someone, was like kidnapped, knowing like it's impossible not to think about it and be scared. But actually it's funny because this is going to sound really strange considering like my whole livelihood, but 24-hour news made parents a lot more afraid that there was more crime and there was more pedophiles and there was more rapists and there was more attackers and stuff like that, when technically there weren't. There's always nothing's ever risk-free, right? Everything, you could get hit by a car, you could, anything could happen. But there was kind of a shift in people's mentality, and it's gotten worse instead of better. And I think a lot of it now has to do with like how much news we consume and how much social media we consume. Like we're terrified and scared all the time. We're also more polarized. We don't believe things that we know to be true anymore, which is really strange. Like things that were kind of set in stone, facts of life, the earth is round. You can eradicate a disease by doing this, this, and that. People are like, no, that's not true. That's not true. Because of, these weird online echo chambers that people get in. And
what is an echo chamber? What is that?
It's like when you go online, let's say, and you just talk to people who believe what you believe. So you're not being exposed to other perspectives. So when people disagree with you or don't feel the same as you're more affronted by it. You're like, oh my God, this person is, an idiot. Like I hate them. Right. So it's funny, because like I make a living writing online. I would not have this job if not for the internet. Like the internet's, the only reason I'm employed at this particular juncture. But sometimes, and I joke with my younger brother about this all the time, as I was like, I think, the internet has now become like the worst thing we've ever done as a society. And I think we should get rid of it.
I know. My old coworker said this to me. He's a lot older, like you said. I think he's in his 60s, and he's like, the internet is going to kill us. It's going to kill us. No, I believe it. I believe it. Like not to get into like, because he's older and we're in our 40s, like we're both 40, but we've seen two sides of things. Because the one thing I wanted to say quickly before we end our conversation is that we were born at the start of the internet. So 1984, I actually thought this was interesting to bring up as a game changer, because we're talking about, 2024, the 40th year of our lives. But in 1984, there are a lot of remarkable things that happen. Apple unveiled the Macintosh personal computer, revolutionizing the tech industry. The space shuttle Discovery had its maiden voyage marking a significant achievement in space exploration. Sony and Philips introduced the first commercial CD players, changing music landscape forever. And so the list goes on, but we were born at the age of the beginning of technology, Ashley. So we're seeing we saw the beginning of it, and like obviously we're seeing the changeover.
Yeah, we are, like, we kind of came of age. It's all true. And in high school we started using instant messages, right? Like there was like MSN Messenger.
Oh my gosh, I never even got into that, but that was a big thing. I remember. Yeah.
big thing. So that was like, but we still saw
Do
each
you
other.
remember? Oh my gosh, I want to say, well, do you remember Zooass? I remember, I don't know if you remember Zooass. It was like
No, I don't
website
think
you go on. It was something like Yahoo chat, but it was another thing I got into from a friend. But it was like at that time you were doing a lot of internet like chat, like the start of that, but you said Messenger. So you had Messenger, obviously, right?
Yeah, and I only like spoke to people on Messenger who I think like I knew like in real life, like,
Yeah.
high school or whatever. But Facebook didn't come out until we were further into university. I want to say I got my first Facebook account first only. I want to say it was basically my first social media, I guess. I want to say I started my Facebook page in 2006. I want to say. I feel like it was like 2005, 2006.
Yeah. I think I did the same thing. Like when we were at York at some point, like people were like, you don't have Facebook? I'm like, no, should I?
Oh yeah, it was a thing. And like now everyone has it, but I just feel like things have gotten much more toxic with social media. Like, people live, like I said, they live on like they live in these echo chambers on like Facebook, on Twitter, Twitter probably being one of the worst offenders, but like a really small thing, when you become
but the younger generation are like, I've overheard them saying like, Instagram's trash. Like I was on the train and this girl was like, it's trash. TikTok's like my thing. And I'm like, wow.
Oh yeah. There's things that, they move ahead for sure. But there's been a lot of like, just, it's made us more. Did you ever watch a movie on Netflix? It was a show, like a mockumentary kind of show called American Vandal. They had 2 seasons. Do you remember?
I've heard of it. I remember it, but I didn't watch it. I think my friend. Yeah.
Oh, okay. It's really good. But there was the second season. There's this part in one of the later episodes where they're talking about social media life in general, like particularly for teenagers, and saying how even though people have never been more like exposed, like never had their lives more broadcast, right? Through apps,
Right.
like they've also never been more dishonest, which like is 100% true. But people live these online lives. What's paradoxical is like the more information we have at our fingertips, I feel like the dumber we've actually become because we can find information that kind of like feeds into our biases, right? And it's just, I think it's just, been, I think it's been bad for us. Like I make my livelihood on the internet. Like it's responsible for my job, but I think we should destroy it.
Destroy it. You can't go. I mean, we've gone too far.
We've gone too far.
And like even George Orwell's 1984, there's so many books on the future of now. Like they already created it before we even got there. So I don't even know how we could have prevented it because so many movies, books made reference to the future that we're living in now. So I don't even know. There were so many hints. But that's another conversation in itself. But yes, another idea. So Ashley Newport, thank you for sharing your experiences and your stories. I do want to say this. If there's anything that you are hopeful of in this year, the 2024 and next year, in the milestone, do you think that, what are you happy with now? Like how it turned out, like in life?
In my own life, I'm just
in your own life. Yeah.
In my own life, I'm like happy with sort of how things have worked out. Like for me right now, like I'm actually glad. I was saying this too, like, there's difficulties with having a child a bit later in life, your own health and your own mortality. You think about that a lot more because, not that you can't get sick or die when you're younger, but, things are more likely to happen the older you get.
Right.
You're also at, a weird stage where, your parents are like, aging or dying or, whatever. But I think that I'm happy to have had him like when I did, because I won't ever be like, oh, I spent my whole this decade or that decade, cleaning, doing laundry and, raising a child. Like right now, like I've done a lot of like the fun things that I wanted to do and I can continue to do them. Not as much. And that's okay. But I feel happy and I'm a lucky person. There's things in my life that were not at all my doing that I just benefited from. But I was able to, go to school. I was able to like have a good group of friends. I was able to do some traveling, meet people and have a good time. And by the time like he came along, I felt super ready for him. So, I look forward to seeing like how parenthood grows, I guess, like how it changes as he gets a little bit older. And I look forward to like, connecting with more people through him. Like it's hard, just like whole other topic, like making friends as an older person.
Yeah,
like, the older you get, the harder it gets to make friends. But kids actually open up a whole new community for you because, once you have kids, they're in school or they're in sports or they're in the arts or they're in something. And like through this, especially when this, tapers off, of course, as they get older and can kind of take themselves to and from, wherever it is they're going. But when they're really, really little, you're kind of in, contact with, other like parents. And this is like a really great way to like kind of build community, because one thing that I think too has kind of been lost with an internet age and exacerbated by COVID is people kind of in silos, sitting at home on their computer all day, watching Netflix or doom scrolling on their phone, things I do.
Yeah.
Like things I do too, don't get me wrong. But kids really force you to get out of the house. They'll destroy your house if you just try to stay home. They'll destroy it. They'll ruin it. They'll take every piece of cutlery out of the drawer. They'll get under the carpet. They will, they're little fireballs. Like they need to move.
That is so adorable. Yeah.
They need to move. So, you kind of get out there. So you're like, okay, how can I fill our time? Right? Like, how can I fill our time? Especially like coming up, like my son's daycare takes a 2-week break at Christmas, which is weird because it's daycare, but it's actually a great daycare. Other than that, he absolutely loves it. Loves it. And the teachers are wonderful. But, you start looking for things to like fill your time with kids. Like, should we go swimming? Should we do a play date? Should we, enroll in this class or whatever? And through that, you really like build community. And if there's one thing I've learned over the past like few years is that there's nothing more important than having a good community of people. Like you need it. You just need it. You need people you can lean on, and you need to be there to like have people lean on you.
Yeah. Like the song Lean on Me.
Yes.
I think you're right. For sure. The one thing that I realized when I had my birthday dinner is that the people who were supposed to be at my birthday dinner were there. And it was a good experience. So listening to you talk about your family, like you're having your son and seeing what you're happy with. I think over the years, like, you have your community for sure. It is very important.
It's so important. It's so, so important. So, like it's good to keep the people from the past. Like if you can do that, that's amazing. But they might not live as close to you. People kind of, spread out a little bit as they get older. So there's people who you could have called on or seen every day, every other day, or every weekend at least when you were, in high school and university and stuff like that. That goes away, as you know.
Two of my friends. I mean, I met you at York, but Ashley, two of my close friends I met at York, and they're both in the West Coast. One's in Calgary, the other one's in Halifax. And
that's far.
Yeah,
far. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's a journey. And I think, like you said, it is harder to make new friends at this age, but I think it is possible. It is possible.
It's 100% possible. And now one thing that's really cool, again, hold the topic, especially for people trying to date later in life, because I have a lot of friends now, or not a lot, but I have friends who are like still dating, either because they're divorced or single or just like haven't found anybody yet. Like I have friends who are still dating. And again, that's a whole other thing. Online dating is like not what it was. It's worse. I think
it is worse. It is so bad. I have good dating stories, bad dating stories, and even stories with, like meeting people. I met someone at McDonald's, but it's like I digress. But I love your story, and I hope to hear more stories. I hope you'll come back on the show. I'm Carlene. This is Diva Tonight. We're talking about This Is 40 with Ashley Newport of INSAUGA and, many, many other roles that you have. But thank you for making the time to be here.
Thank you for having me.
Diva Tonight with Carlene will be back. New season, new ideas, and great guests. Send us a message on Instagram at diva_tonight.